Does reality need a cause, or do we just want it to? To answer that, we've got to slow way down and get clear on something basic, what we even mean when we say the word reality, because almost every argument about God, causes, or existence quietly assumes an answer to that question before it ever starts. When I say reality, I don't mean something mystical. I don't mean a force, I don't mean a mind, I don't mean a thing floating above the universe. I mean something very simple. Reality is just the totality of what exists. Everything that's the case. Everything that's real in any sense at all. Not inside a container, not sitting on top of something deeper, not waiting to be explained by something outside it. Just all of it. And that's important, because once you define reality this way, a lot of familiar questions start to look different. People love to ask, why does reality exist at all then? Why isn't there nothing instead? That question sounds deep, but there's actually a problem hiding inside it, because nothingness isn't a real alternative. Nothingness isn't a state the world could be in. It doesn't have structure, properties, it doesn't have the ability to obtain. It's not something that could have happened but didn't. It's just the absence of anything. It can't even exist without something else. So when we say, why something rather than nothing, we're pretending nothingness is a genuine option, like reality had a choice, but it didn't. Nothingness can't explain anything, it can't compete with reality, it can't replace it. So the question why reality exists already assumes a contrast that doesn't make sense. Reality doesn't need a reason instead of nothing, because nothing was never on the table. In other words, reality simply must exist. There's no other option. Reality, as I've just described it, is necessary, uncaused, and eternal. And I'm not adding extra stuff to it. I'm not saying there's some special ingredient called necessity floating around inside reality. I'm talking about dependence. To say reality is necessary just means there's nothing more fundamental it depends on. To say it's uncaused means there's no earlier condition required for it to exist. To say it's eternal doesn't mean lasting forever in time. It means it's not something that pops in and out of existence. These aren't objects, these aren't forces, they aren't entities. They're descriptions of where explanation bottoms out. Descriptions of what doesn't need any more explaining. At some point, explanation has to stop. Reality itself is where it stops. Now, inside reality, we find the universe, matter, energy, space-time, fields, particles, processes, everything physics studies. But the universe isn't identical to reality itself, it's part of reality. Reality is the whole picture. The universe is one region of it, a structured physical part. You can think of it as the universe being the waves in the ocean, and the ocean is reality. The ocean isn't the waves, and the waves isn't the ocean. The waves exists within the ocean. So saying reality exists isn't the same as saying the universe caused itself, or the universe is God. It's just saying the universe exists within something more general, the fact that anything exists at all. Now let's talk about laws of nature. In this view, laws aren't rulers, they're not commands reality obeys. Laws are descriptions. They're human-made summaries of stable patterns in how reality behaves. We observe regularities, we compress them into equations, we call those laws. So laws don't generate reality, they don't govern it, they describe it. Once you treat laws as things that control reality, you've added an extra layer that doesn't actually explain anything. Here's another important clarification. When I say reality has structure, I don't mean structure is something sitting on top of reality. Structure just means that something is the case rather than nothing being the case. It's intrinsic to reality. If reality had no structure at all, there'd be no facts, no states, no differences, nothing. A totally structureless reality would collapse into nothing happening, nothing existing, nothing being true. So structure isn't an optional feature. It doesn't have to be the structure we have in this universe, in this reality. There just needs to be a structure for something to exist. For existence itself to exist. It's intrinsic. It's just what it means for anything to exist in the first place. This brings us to change. In Aristotelian metaphysics, change is explained using potency, the idea that things have built-in capacities to become something else. But here's the problem: potency doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't predict what will happen, it doesn't cause motion, it doesn't constrain outcomes. It just labels what could happen given a structure. All the real explanatory work is already being done by the actual structures, the actual relations, and the actual interactions. Potency ends up being explanatory surplus. It's just a concept that we use to understand change. Change isn't something mysterious moving from potential to actual, it's just reality being one way, then another way, because of how it's structured. No extra metaphysical layer needed. Now we can finally talk about first cause arguments. They usually go like this: things have causes, nothing can cause itself, so there must be a first cause, and that first cause is God. It sounds neat, sounds tidy, but every step relies on assumptions that aren't proven. First, it assumes causation is always linear and sequential. One thing pushes another back in time until you hit the start. But causation doesn't have to work that way. It can be structural, it can be relational, it can be descriptive rather than productive. So the argument starts by assuming a very specific model of causation and then treats it as universal. There's another version of this argument that doesn't even rely on a first cause. It says that everything in the universe is contingent, meaning it could have failed to exist, and contingent things don't explain themselves. So the universe as a whole must depend on something necessary. But there's a problem here too, because contingent isn't really a discovered feature inside things. It's a way of describing dependence. It's not like we find a label stamped onto objects saying could have not existed. It's just a way about talking about how we're choosing to explain things. And then there's another jump being made. From every part is contingent to the whole must be contingent. But that move isn't automatic. A system can be fully real and self-contained at the structural level, even if every internal part is dependent on other parts. So the contingency argument quietly assumes that dependence has to point outside the system, when it might just be internal structure all the way down. And once you see that, the idea of a necessary being outside reality starts to look less like a conclusion and more like a built-in assumption. Next, it says infinite regress is impossible, but infinite structures aren't contradictory. They're just infinite. Calling them unsatisfying isn't an argument, it's a preference. Finally, even if you did grant a first cause, a foundational reality, nothing in the argument gives you a mind, intentions, purposes, or moral commands. Those are added later, they're not derived. So the move from first cause to God isn't a conclusion, it's a reinterpretation. At the core, this isn't really about religion, it's about explanation. One view says explanation must terminate in a special cause. The other says that reality itself is where explanation stops. Not because it's divine, not because it's personal, but because explanation can't go on forever without changing the question. Adding a first cause doesn't deepen understanding, it just pushes the same mystery back one step. So reality doesn't need permission to exist. Nothingness was never a real alternative, and calling reality God doesn't explain it, it just gives mystery a familiar name. Sometimes the most honest explanation is the one that stops adding what it doesn't need.